All right, I guess let's get going here. So I don't know how to break this to you. Um, I probably don't have 2 weeks of content left in the class. Oh no. Um, and I feel kind of bad about that in a sense. Like, you pay for a full course and you get 12 weeks worth or whatever. But yeah, this is our last topic. And well, I'm sure I could squeeze some blood out of the stone if I had to. Marina's like, you don't have to. So we're probably going to be done by Friday, like next Monday at the very latest, though I would have to do my exceptional overstretching of content, which I can do. I've done it before. And I'm very skilled at stretching minimal content into maximum time. But I probably just end whenever we finish this unit and don't tell anyone. I'm going to give you like 3 classes to do the spot survey so you feel like you have enough time. It's like, did you get in class time to complete this survey? You could say that. Yeah, and whatever, the pacing is weird this year, and I'm usually right on for pacing where I end a class early, but actually having this class 3 times a week has really messed up my pacing, which I know it's the same amount of time, and I don't understand why it would be different from when I have it twice a week, but it absolutely is, and I don't know, maybe I hurry up at the end of every class or something, or was that one online lecture where I covered like 3 weeks worth of material in 42 minutes. I don't know, but we're almost out of content, and I sense no one wants any more intros to methods. I could make up a method for you. Interpretive dance as a method. I saw Gladiator 2 this weekend. I didn't see Wicked. I will say, I was not entertained. It's a bad movie. Don't see Gladiator 2. Yeah, yeah. I've seen the musical. Like I've seen the stage musical. It's good. I like Wicked. It's fine. I was not entertained. All right. It is a bad. Well, okay. I would say it's a solid. Like it's a very mid movie. I would give it like 4 out of 10. And I'm like, which is like, but then I'm comparing it to the original and I have a ton of affection for the original, which it was I thought quite good. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Methods, yay. Okay. Now, again, I just want to stress this for the record. As of whenever we finish this, you're done with this topic. I get to teach it again next semester. So, if you think, oh boy, well, just think of me and my suffering. I drew stuff and it vanished. Oh, there it is. Okay. All right, so let's talk some kind of basics of analyzing data. Technically, we should do this before mixed methods because we're talking qualitative data, but in order to do the labs, it always ends up getting flipped. Okay. What am I talking about? Let's talk about this. All right, so general strategies for qualitative analysis. And we've been talking about this a lot, right? I mentioned this term. If you took a shot for every time I talked about grounded theory in the course, you'd probably be pretty drunk still. It's a lot. So we'll talk grounded theory and its very close cousin, analytic induction, because they're very similar. And then we'll talk about some basic stuff. We've talked about coding a little bit already. I didn't finish my box. There we go. The OCD runs deep, I guess. We'll talk about coding again. I'm not beaten. PowerPoint did what I wanted it to do there. We'll talk about coding again, and then we'll talk a little bit about this other strategy called narrative analysis, and then we'll pretty much be done. The course will be over. All right, so what is analytic induction? You know what? I enjoyed the green last time. I'm going to switch to green. There we go. Default is red because Microsoft hates you, but the green is what I'm going with. So qualitative analysis, right? Basically analytic induction. When we talk qualitative analysis using analytic induction, it's analytic induction and grounded theory are very similar. The biggest difference is their sort of end stage, right? So analytic induction, right? Both of these, grounded theory and analytic, are both iterative processes, right? So they both follow this kind of like data analysis, data analysis, data analysis, data analysis, sort of repeating step until you get, again, they have different endpoints. With analytic induction, you go until, almost dropped my pen, until no contradictory cases are found. So what does this kind of look like in principle, right? You collect data, right? So again, because we're talking inductive, we're always talking data to theory, right? So that's always going to be the direction. You get data first, and then you create a theory from there. So you get some data and you do some analysis on that information that you've gotten, right? That data that you've collected. And then, so again, very similar to grounded theory, you go and get more, right? So you come up with, generally speaking, some kind of hypothesis, right? You come up, or you do your analysis, you come up with a general research question, some data are gathered, and you create a hypothesis. Now, you create a hypothesis that's meant to explain the data. What you're looking for in analytic induction generally are your edge cases, right? So anything that's inconsistent with your hypothesis, you basically are looking for in the data. So what you do is you do this, right? So you gather data, so you gather it, and you create a hypothesis that you think explains all your data. I don't know what letter that's supposed to be, right? So you're like, okay, now I think I've got a hypothesis that explains every piece of the data that I have. And then you go and you get more. And then you test that hypothesis, looking for things that don't fit, right? So if there is some case that isn't explained by your hypothesis, then you have to go and revise your hypothesis, right? So you redefine it to, basically either to exclude the case or you fundamentally revise it to include the whole case. But basically, you want your hypothesis to explain all of the data that you have. Now, would I have this on the next slide? I do. But let me just clear this off. It's like, it sounds pretty simple, and it is, right? But you're going to keep doing this until basically, let's say your sort of end stage in analytic induction would be you have your hypothesis, you go and you gather your data, and you still find after gathering more data that everything is explained, right? That it all fits. Then you generally can say that you're sort of like, you've caught everything, right? You've redefined your hypothesis so that everything is included, right? Okay, so what I'm being very vague, right? So let's say that you are doing a study of, why don't we say furries? Because why the hell not? We've been so consistent with this. Or Ivan, you've done nothing. It's all on me. This is my hang up, right? So you're talking to them about why they dress like furries, right? And in your first wave of interviews, right, they're all telling you that they do it, because they love animals, right? And they feel a real connection with nature that they can't express any other way. So you come up with your hypothesis, right? It's all about nature and connection with nature. And then you go gather more data. But then, two people tell you, oh, it's because you weren't allowed to have stuffed animals as a child, right? And now you're reconnected with the stuffed animals that you never had as a child. And like, okay, then you have to expand your hypothesis to include that, right? Or explain why you can kind of, why you can exclude that case. But usually you make it broader. Okay, and now you're like, okay, now nature and stuffed animal trauma. Okay, now you go back and you collect more data, and someone tells you that it's because of a weird sexual fetish. And then you're like, okay, you have to expand your hypothesis to explain all of those cases, right? And basically, you keep doing this until there are no cases that are excluded, right? And generally speaking, right, you either have to do two things. You either drop your hypothesis when you find new data, or you fundamentally revise it. Add elements, broaden it out, change it in some way. And your goal is to eventually come up with some hypothesis that basically fits everything. Okay, so I think the problem with this is probably pretty obvious, right? Analytic induction has a certain problem, which is eventually your theory or your hypothesis can get too big. And it kind of loses, at that point, a lot of its explanatory power, right? Like it'll include everything, but it won't maybe give you a ton of insight, or it won't reveal anything particularly interesting, because it's like, let's say furries adopt their persona for a lot of reasons. That vary by the individual, right? You can see how potentially that kind of broad hypothesis, right? You'd be like, there are, if your hypothesis is there are numerous reasons that people adopt furry personas. Okay, great. That's not going to tell you anything particularly interesting about furries, right? It certainly isn't going to narrow things down too much. And if you're doing true analytic induction, you can keep going at this for a really long time until you stop finding those kind of cases that are on the edge of your hypothesis. Okay, the other one. Because it's a qualitative method, and qualitative methods are not often very defined in when you stop or how you do things. And this is actually a major problem as well. There's no guidelines on how many cases must be reviewed before the validity of the hypothesis is accepted. So when do you stop? And it's funny because I know a few of our grad students in the department and the kind of work that they're doing. And I chat with them here and there, and I'm like, oh, how are you going? How's it going? How's your dissertation going? And they're like, oh yeah, I think I'm good. I have about 50 interviews, and I just think I need to do about 5 more. And I'm like, no, stop, write, leave. Not that I don't love our grad students, but a 10-year grad student is not a thing that helps anyone. But they're kind of caught in this problem, right? Often it's like, well, there's something I still can't explain, right? There's something that doesn't quite fit. Or, the last few interviews I did, these people were telling me different things. Okay, but because there's no guideline on when to stop, people doing this kind of work, and this can apply to grounded theory as well, it can get really difficult to know when you've got enough data. Because it's not like, analytic and, right, quantitative methods. Quantitative methods are very clean for this, right? You do your survey, and you survey 3,000 people, and it's like, great, I've got my data for my 3,000 person survey, I do the analysis, boom, 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 right? You run your regressions, you write it up, you come up with your H1, H2, H3, nice and clean, right? And because the methodology sort of tells you, okay, if you want to do a study of this group, you define your population, you figure out what your sample is, and you go and you do your surveys, right? You do your quantitative work, and it's very clear what that is. With qualitative work, when is enough enough? Sometimes enough is enough when no one else will talk to you. That's a good sign. When you've run out of people to talk to, that's a good sign. When your supervisor stops answering your emails because they're sick of you, or they thought you graduated already several years ago, and what are you still doing here? That might be, no, that never happens. Or does it? I don't know. I can think of a few circumstances that might have been something like that. There's no real like hard and fast guidelines in qualitative work. So the researcher has to be kind of disciplined, or the study can go on forever. And that doesn't necessarily fit with the method, because the method is like, no, you go until you don't have any contradictory cases. But that could go on forever, and you might get in your last interview that one person that doesn't fit, and then you got to go back to this choice. Like, do I fundamentally change my hypothesis? I've done all this analysis. Do I revise my hypothesis, or what do I do with this, right? And this can become a real problem, again, depending on the kind of researcher you are. Okay, does that all make sense? Okay. I'm not telling stories about which grad students it is. But if you want names, come talk. No, I'm kidding. Some of you might have had them as professors, and some of you will have them as professors, because eventually they're going to need to pay their bills. Okay, so grounded theory. We've talked a bunch about grounded theory. I took forever to finish my PhD for entirely different reasons. That my supervisor was an alcoholic that didn't do her work, and therefore never got my drafts back to me. Or it was like 8 months to get a draft back with comments. And then the comments were pretty sparse, and the whole dissertation smelled of alcohol and whiskey, or alcohol and cigarettes. But that's my deep and abiding trauma. I only found this out later. I'm like, why does my stuff always smell weird? And it's like, oh, she chain smokes and drinks while she reads my stuff, which might explain the usefulness of the comments as well. When I finally changed supervisors, they looked at my dissertation like, this is great, let's defend it like 3 months from now. And I'm like, trauma, it's deep. Don't go to grad school, or do, but pick a better supervisor than I did. I had recommendations from people that said she was great, so you never know what you're going to get. It's like a Kinder Surprise, except it can ruin your life. Okay, there we go. My trauma notwithstanding. All right, so grounded theory, right? Again, grounded theory, what is it grounded in? It's grounded in data. So again, we're talking about an iterative, inductive kind of research method, right? So theory that was derived from data, systemically gathered and analyzed through the research process. And that, clearly this is the most used framework for analyzing qualitative data. And even people who didn't necessarily do grounded theory as a sort of method when they were lining up. If you run into trouble and you were doing qualitative work, and they're like, so what methodology were you using? And you're like, grounded theory. I was doing grounded theory. Oh, why didn't you write any of that? Well, we all kind of do grounded theory, don't we? Did not happen to me, but I could see that working. Okay, so yeah, it is, again, inductive and iterative, right? And it's that data, hypothesis, or theory. I'm just going to put H. More data. Revise, right? This is the whole kind of thing about all of these inductive and iterative processes, is you go through this, right? Now, in theory, the idea is that you are doing analysis throughout the research project, right? Or the research process. So again, different from, say, quant, where in quantitative, what would you be doing, right? You would get your surveys or whatever research, whatever materials you're doing, and you would kind of get all of them and then do the analysis, right? You collect all the data you're going to use, and then you do the analysis. With this, right, again, you're gathering and analyzing and gathering and analyzing and gathering and analyzing through the whole process. Watch this yourself. I'm not holding my laptop up again. I'm just not doing this. It's a really cute video where this guy pretends he's doing grounded theory, but you can watch it on your own time. It's cute, and it helps explain it, but it's just so ridiculous that nothing works in this room. the screen doesn't work. I don't know what would work with this thing to connect sound to it. I suspect nothing at this point. Like there's a button, I don't know. Anyway, I give up. C'est la fin pour moi. Okay, watch it, it's cute.
Okay.
No. I just can't anymore with this room. It's like, it's meant to chew up time, but whatever, we're all good. It's like, no, it's 24. I'll just hold up the lap. I honestly feel like I'm from like one of those movies from the 80s where someone's like on the curb holding up the boom box, and I'm like, okay, enough of this. I should have brought my own Bluetooth speaker and I could like point it at you, because, you know, this is what we have to do at U of A, is actually like have workarounds for broken technology. Okay. So basic, the hard turns in my like chatter shows you that it's the end of the semester for me too. But I feel so much better because the new payment system for the CCR for participants works really well. And today's payments, which would have taken me an hour and a half before, took me 8 minutes. I timed it because I'm like, I want to know how much of my life I've wasted. And just calculate that back from February. 2.5 hours a day. Anyway, I'm not bitter, but I am deeply and abidingly bitter. Okay, so grounded theory. What do we have in here? Okay, so coding. So obviously coding, and we'll talk about what coding looks like, but at each step, right, so when you collect your data, right, and you're talking like interviews probably, or focus groups, or whatever it has, or, you know, if you're doing ethnography, there's ways of coding that as well. And you get your data from your interviews, and then you code it, right? And this is basically coding is a pretty simple process. There's a bunch of different ways of doing it, from, you know, just putting things in categories in Word to using software like NVivo. But basically, you're putting things into kind of broad categories so that you can lump them together according to themes and how they work, right? So it gives you a way of kind of understanding your data, of putting similar statements together. When you come to writing stuff, coding is really useful, because if you're looking for a quote to throw into your writing that epitomizes a particular kind of idea that someone said, you would, you know, have the codes already there and statements already put in. So you can have all sorts of codes, right? Codes can be basically anything, but let's say our imaginary furry study, right? And you're talking about why they dress as furries, and we want to talk trauma. You would have a whole category for trauma. And any statement that someone told you in your interviews that has to do with, you know, some trauma that they went through which caused them to dress as a furry, right, or attend furry conventions or whatever, you would put in there, right? And, you know, you would have other ones for, you know, connection to nature, you know, fetish, whatever it happens to be, and stuff. You know, you'd put the equivalent statements in there. So you use these categories to do some comparisons, right? So you can, some of the systems now, like I said, NVivo is the one that everybody swears by. I've never really used it much. NVivo. But it has like nice visualization functions, so it can show you like, okay, you upload all your interview transcripts into this. Oh, by the way, before you code, you transcribe. So, you know, there's a lot of steps in this. Always cheat on your transcription by making someone else do it. I mean, never do that. But seriously, it's a miserable process, and don't do that. So you transcribe, you code, and then you compare, right? So you might look at your interviews and see, you know, how many people fit into this category? How many people fit into this category? How many statements are there? How many times do certain themes come up, right? And you're doing this kind of coding and analysis of the data to see what's there. And then, of course, you go and you collect more, right? You collect more data, and then you code it, categorize it, analyze it, see what's in there. You know, you repeat this process basically throughout the whole process, which again can mean that you're doing this for years, right? So Marina's like, no, not 4 years. My friend Dorothy did this literally for years, and it was really, really difficult for her because she had 2 maternity leaves in the middle where she was collecting, data while she was like 9 months pregnant and then going on maternity leave and coming back and then like having to redo this and like recontextualize her data and all of this fun stuff. It took a really, really long time and it was really hard. But your goal this is the goal. This is where you're supposed to stop, right? This is when you reach this point, you stop. And I went back to red for stop because it's a stoppy type color. Theoretical saturation, and that is basically when you're not learning anything new, right? So, and again, it's a little bit more of a, shall we say, wobbly point than you might find in quantitative analysis, right? You stop when you've got your data and you've explained your data, which is why quant PhDs take less time than qual ones, and possibly why quantitative researchers make fun of qualitative researchers all the time. It does have actual advantages on the market sometimes, where it's like, I finished my PhD in 4.5 years, and you're like, I finished my PhD in 7.5 years. People are like, that guy must be way more together. It's like, no, they were just doing a quant study. It's different. Okay, the point where nothing new is being learned. And you kind of get this when, oh, how to put this? And again, this sounds like a very mushy bar, but it sort of is what it is. If you feel like you've heard everything before, you're doing interviews and you're talking to people and everyone is telling you things you've already heard. There's no new themes coming up. You're not creating any new codes, right? So you're coding and everything kind of fits into the codes you've already created. You've probably hit a sort of theoretical saturation where basically you're not, you've learned everything about that population that you are going to learn at that point, and it is time to stop. It's basically time to bring the project to an end. Okay. A clock, so I always feel bad because I'm like, I look at my watch and I feel like that makes it look like I'm bored of being here. Like, can I leave already? I remember way back in the day, long before any of you existed, when George W. Bush looked at his watch, or was it, no, it was his father, George H.W. Bush, looked at his watch during a debate, and everybody took this as like, oh man, he doesn't want to be here. Like, how long is this stupid debate going to take? And then he lost the election, and I'm like, I don't want to give that impression, but there's literally no way to tell time in here. Like, that clock is wrong. That's like 10 minutes behind. That is a piece of sheet metal stuck to a wall. There's no... And then this monitor, which has the time, has been broken for like months. It's very distressing. Okay. Did I explain everything that's on this slide already in my last slide as I was explaining coding? Oh, I'm the worst. I'm sorry. See, it's all in my brain, and that's the problem. Okay. Coding. Labels given to activities being observed. It can be grouped together, right? So that would be in like an ethnography. So behaviors being observed. If you're observing behaviors, you can code them. Those would come out of your field notes. And anything that comes out of your interviews, right? Any statements or things that people are talking about would be these sorts of things, right? Anything, issues, statements, activities that are being, that can be grouped together. Those would be your codes. You start this early in your research project. So basically, like after you do interview 1, you transcribe it, you code it, and you start to build all of your categories. And you will keep doing this as you go forward, right? And you'll have your code book and all of these things. And again, software makes this way easier. It's the first step in interpreting data and developing a theory. It gives you a sense of what's in the data, right? And it allows you sort of to organize things into the statements that you think are useful. And yeah, they're treated as potential descriptors or indicators of concepts or things you might want to study or talk about. Okay. So, types of coding. essentially 3 types of coding that we can talk about. Open coding. So this is your initial, we say it's close to the data. But it's your initial kind of concepts that you categorize together. So basically, you could do this in Word, or you could do this very, very simply, or just in memos. Like sometimes I use the comment function in Word to just kind of leave myself notes, right? But you're doing a sort of open coding, something that you're going to formalize later. So you just identify concepts, right? So you might write a note, you have your Word document, and you put in a comment, and it says, this might be, talking about like furry identity as a sexual fetish, right? Or something like that. So axial coding, basically data, you review the data and you look for linkages and reorganize it according to those connections, right? So basically you reorganize the data, you would typically go from your open coding to more formalized codes, and then you look and you would say, okay, so probably this code is related to this code, right? And there's a connection between these two. You're looking for, kind of axes in the data where things are selected, we're reading off the next part of the slide, where things are connected, right? Not selected, connected. And then selective coding, right? You basically figure out what your core, what are your core categories, right? What are the most important things? What are the things that you want to bring out in later analysis? So you look at what relationships there are to other concepts. You see if there's any gaps, right? Is there anything missing, right? Did you forget to ask anything? And here, right, if there's gaps that need to be filled, maybe you need to recode and create another category, or maybe you need to go and get more data. Maybe you need to do a follow-up interview. Maybe you need to go back. And then, of course, you kind of, at the selective coding stage, or in selective coding, you can sort of try and figure out what everything means and come up with your emerging theory. So, you've got your data, now you've got your theory. Now go get more data, because that's how this works. I love this building. Just like randomly in my last class, they started hammering on the wall during the end of class, and I'm like, okay, before everything collapses on us, let's leave. Okay, so what are your outcomes for grounded theory, right? So I love this building. I love this building. I love this building. No, I love that it's 5 steps from my office, but nothing else about it. As they slowly clear the asbestos out into my lungs, I think. I don't know. I don't know what they're doing on the 3rd floor, but they have gutted the entire thing. Like, there used to be like student services up there, and they took everything out, like everything out of the rooms. They threw out all the furniture, and I don't even know what is happening, but it should be interesting once it's all done. It'll probably be beautiful, or maybe it'll have like roller derby desks like this room. I don't know. We'll see. Maybe this broken monitor will join. I love this room. Okay. So, it's so distracting when you hear like sawing directly above you and you ponder the end of your own existence. Okay, so our concepts. When we talk about coding, right? Concepts. So the building blocks of your theory. So what are your basic, like let's say we're talking about coding I don't know, let's just go with the furry thing, because we seem to keep going with that. So what are your core, right? So you've got, we've talked about nature, connection to nature, love of animals, trauma. You don't have to write these parts down. These are just my examples. Fetish or whatever. These would each be categories, right? So these are, concepts. They're concepts because I know what I'm talking about. These are each concepts that you're going to explore and that you're looking at, and you see, bless you, that was quick, that you find within the data, right? So these are what you're going to build your theory off of, right? Eventually, you're going to use all of these things that you found in the data to construct your theory of what this social phenomenon that you've found means. Okay, categories. If you think two of these kind of fit together, right, you can lump them into a category. So these all, so, you know, nature and animals might be lumped into, you know, I don't know, let's just say we'll lump it into the larger thing of nature, right? Because they both have to do with a connection to nature and these sorts of things. And then trauma and fetish, you might lump into, I don't know, let's say deviance. I'm not saying anything about furries. I'm just trying to come up with examples. If you're a furry, please don't murder me in my sleep. Not that a furry would ever do that, but you know, I'm not making fun of you. One day I'm gonna get the hate of the furry community come up against me. I need to find a better example. Okay, right, so you might lump these under deviance, right? Or forms of deviance, and these would be categories, right? Two or more concepts lumped together, you know, and you could say, you know, everything that's in here is an example of deviance, and everything that's in here is an example of, you know, spiritual connection to nature or something like that. You know, properties, you don't always have properties, but if there's like attributes of, you know, of categories, right? Something like, you know, they all have to do with, you know, disorders, psychological disorders, or, you know, I don't know, modern disconnection from nature. You can say that, you know, they all kind of share certain properties, that everything within those categories are there. Okay, and then obviously, wow, my slides get so messy. I don't know if drawing on my slides is the best way, but I really enjoy it. And it's really fun. It gives me something to do while I'm talking. Otherwise, I just like twirl my cup around and drop it 100 times. And, you know, this one's getting pretty dented up, so I don't, and it's my favorite, so I don't want to wreck it. So your hypothesis, right, your initial hunch, and then your theory that you develop as, you know, basically at your sort of end stage. Once you've really moved through most of the data, you've got your theory. Okay, so this can be either a substantive theory, right? Observe patterns, you relate them to each other, and the theory is developed to explain the connections in that setting, right? So basically, it's sort of, I would say this one's more contextual, right? So your substantive theory is contextual in that it will relate really only to the specific thing that you are looking at. Does that make sense, right? So it's just in the setting that you're in. You know, if you're doing like furries in Edmonton, and you're only talking about that, you would have a substantive theory. Now, a formal theory would be something much broader, where, you know, theory formulated at a higher level requires data collection in several settings. So let's say, you know, you wanted to get a theory of, you know, subcultures, right? So you start and you've got furries, and you've got bronies, if they still exist. I don't know that they do. And then you've got, trying to think of another subculture, Trekkies, again, if they still exist. What are they? Cosplayers. Let's say cosplayers. Because these are all exactly the same thing, right? I'm sure no one would get offended at me saying that. So now you've got a whole bunch of different subcultures that you've looked at in different locations and settings, and you might be able to come up with sort of a formal theory of, you know, adult subcultures, right? Adult subcultures, because you've now got a few different kinds of groups. Maybe you went, you know, and you got furries from here, there, and everywhere, and the same with Trekkies and cosplayers, right? You kind of got a bunch of data on them, and you can come up with a formal theory that's meant to explain that group. But you need to do that data collection in different settings. I've broken everything. Highlighter. Data collection in different settings. Okay. maybe I'll do this last slide and then we'll call her a day. So, grounded theory. What does it actually look like? So, general research question, right? You have an idea what you want to study. You have like some sense of what it is you want to know, right? Now, again, this is going to be a very general question because you don't want it to be too specific, because you want to be open to what the data is telling you. So then you do your kind of, either theoretical sampling or, relevant people or incidents are theoretically sampled. So you figure out what you want to look at. What would be the best instance? Where do you go? Who do you talk to? What is it you want? Where is it you want to get that data? And then you collect the data. You do your interviews, you do your ethnography, you put on your costume and you are Snowball the cat at the Edmonton Furry Con, right? You embody. my goal is to just make you imagine me dressed as a 5'11" cat. That has been my whole purpose in this entire course, is to get us to this point. I'm gonna be as red as my shirt, that's the problem. Okay. Then you code the data, you try to figure out your concepts, and you keep getting data, figure out what your categories are. Once you figure out all the categories, right, explore the relationship between categories, come up with your hypothesis, and then you start the process again. You collect more, data. You figure out, hey, who else do I need to talk to? You collect more data. You analyze it. You collect the categories, test your hypothesis, and then maybe you produce a substantive theory or not. But you can end up in these steps, right? At sort of, where are we talking? Let's say between, after your initial phase, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You may repeat these steps a whole bunch of times, right? Until you run out of stuff, right? Until your categories are saturated, you're not learning anything else. You reach theoretical saturation, and then you can get to your theories. So, constant movement back and forth. Among the first 4 steps, basically 7, 8, 9, 7, 8, 9 are just repeats of 2, 3, 4. So you kind of go back through these steps until you reach that theoretical saturation and you're not learning anything else. Oh, all right. Well, I was just going to go through this slide. I'm out of time-ish, sort of. I have 3 minutes. I kind of talked about all these steps, right? But you get the point, right? Each of these steps is sort of repeats of the others. You're moving through data collection over and over again. And we'll talk about memos in grounded theory next time, and not at all complete the course super early. And then you'll be subjected to my interpretive dance as a method, which I think is about as valid as autoethnography or studying yourself. So look forward to that if we run out of stuff. Or